Hello, everyone. Welcome to the long-awaited Fwdays React plus JS conference. We are on track R, and as Irina said, today's the first talk on track R will be from Natalia Tepluhina. Natalia Tepluhina is a Vue core team member, staff front-end engineer at GitLab, a conference speaker, and author of multiple articles on different topics related to Vue.js. By the way, if you are interested in Vue, would like to start using Vue.js or switch to Vue, or just would like to improve your knowledge, I would definitely recommend to see all this past topic from Natalia. Thanks to these articles, she got the title of Google Developer Expert in Web Technologies, by the way. Before the talk, one more point. During the presentation, if you will have any questions to Natalia, please post your questions to Discord chat or to the public Telegram JavaScript Fwdays channel. And after the talk, we will have some short Q&A session. Well, it's time for presentation. Please welcome Natalia Tepluhina.
Thank you, Alexei. I'm really happy to be here today. Really happy to be opening one for the track A at the conference. And we will speak about a really painful topic on local state management. Fair warning, it's 1 hour earlier here in the Netherlands where I currently am, and it's Saturday. So if you hear some weird noises, that means my family just woke up and having a breakfast. Don't mind them, please. Let me very quickly reintroduce myself. Alexei told it all, but I'm Vue.js core team member. I care mostly about Vue documentation. So if you've been reading Vue docs for version 2 or version 3, there is a high chance you've been checking something like that. And it's very ironic to be Vue core team member JS+React conference. But talk topic is framework agnostic, so it's okay. I work as a staff front-end engineer at GitLab, and I'm a Google Developer Expert, which has nothing to do with the conference topic, but just a nice thing to mention. So we will be speaking about global signature. And as examples, we will use application using Vue. Obviously, I'm Vue core team member. I cannot just build it with React on stage. And Pinya. Pinya is Vue state manager. Again, the topic itself is framework agnostic. The solution that I will be demoing on the stage came from actually the React land, so it's still relevant to the conference. And I hope it will be useful for everyone. So, global state. In a nutshell, what it is. This is some data that we want to share across multiple places in our application that mostly don't belong to parent-child relationship. Maybe different routes on the page, maybe something else, or some independent components sharing the same state. How does it look on Vue.js Pinya? Quite familiar for everyone. It's very simple. You define a store, give store a name, and you have some property. In our case, this counter that is shared across the application. How do we change the counter? Well, we add actions, term that is familiar for Vuex, Redux, and everyone users, and we just increment the counter with the action. This looks quite simple, right? Because we're dealing with synchronous state. It means that we don't involve any async logic in changing our counter. The state is not persistent, which means that our counter lives on the client. And whenever you refresh a page, you have a counter 0. And it stores there and only there. It has one source of changes. Our state only changes when you press a button and call the increment action, and it does not create a lot of boilerplate. This is some kind of debatable, especially if you use Redux, some kind of boilerplate. Still, it's bearable. You can try to have a shared state and have a single source of truth for all the changes that make to this state. Now, let's add some server data into this game. And for the demo purposes, I will be using this application with tractors. It's funny because when I've been given the similar talk on the foreign conferences, people are just looking like, why tractors? What's the point? I'm from Ukraine. So I developed quite a lot for tractors in the last month. I don't think that here it needs any explanation, but let's just follow with tractors. So in our application, we have a list of tractors that is displayed on the main page, and we have a counter on the top. So we will be considering these two as two independent components that need the same data from the local store. And we will need to fetch data for them independently. Why independently? Why not on the roots level? Well, if I'm on this page, I only have counter, so I don't need to fetch data for the main page. And my counter in the navbar, let's assume it's not always visible. Let's assume that we have a product manager, we have a feature flag for counter, and they're just thinking like, should we leave the counter in the navbar or not? So in some cases, counter is not available. So let's assume that we definitely need to fetch data for main view and for the counter. We don't want to do this on the root application level. We don't want to start our action in the root, because if we're on this page with a single tractor and feature flag for counter is off, we don't need to fetch data for anything. And we don't want to make an API call. Okay, with this assumption, let's try to take a look how our local state will be evolving these requirements. It looks simple, very basic, not even crude application right now. So we have a bit more properties that we need for the counter, because we're already dealing with asynchronous state. So basic requirement here is to have a loading state and error state. What if our promise is rejected? Still not a boilerplate. And we want to fetch our tractor. So we set the loading to true, we fetch our tractors, we save them in these tractors, which is our state property, and we set loading back to false. Basic thing, everything is okay. And now we need to add this to our components to access the state. So in both components, we place our use store. We have an access now to the global state manager, and we need to fetch the tractors. We assume that components don't know about each other, and we want to make sure that tractors are available. And it leads to very obvious consequence. Two components, two calls of the action, two API calls. So not optimal. You can see that one is happening faster. This is navbar because it's an application layout. We are programmers. We know how to do things. Let's deduplicate the calls manually. So we will create this getter, a questionable hack getter that basically checks if there are tractors already in the state, or if we already have loading, that means fetch is started, maybe already finished, but we care about started. And if fetch is not started, we fetch the tractors. Put this logic in the components. Cool. Like if fetch has not started, we only fetch for navbar because it's first, and everyone is happy. Now let's continue with the logic. We want also to fetch a single tractor. Important thing, for the main view, we have this response that only has three properties because we need to display image, name of the tractor, and we need some ID to refer to the tractor as an entity. So whenever I go to the tractor page, I will use this ID as a slot in a browser. But when I fetch a single tractor, it also has a bit more data. Engine, rated power, and description. And I want a single source of truth, right? I want that whenever I fetch a tractor with ID 1, it's stored in my cache, in my local state indefinitely. So whenever I go to the page of the tractor, I have all this detailed information. And the most common solution that comes to mind immediately is I already have an array of tractors, or probably I will have them, and I just want to extend. So whenever I go to the tractor page, I'm fetching the data, I'm extending my array, and I'm happy. And whenever I go to this page again, I already have it. And I have a getter that selects a tractor by ID. Simple. Sounds super easy. So this is a logic to fetch a tractor. And why it looks so complicated instead of just fetching a tractor? Well, I assume I have an array of tractors, possibly. So if I have a tractor in this array, I'm doing this extension just with 3 properties. And if I don't have this tractor in the array, but maybe I went to some specific ID that is not on the first page, I'm just pushing this tractor into the array. Cool, works. But I also need to modify the main fetch logic, because I can simply think about the scenario where I go to the tractor page first by deep link, and then I go to the home page. And on the home page, I don't want to fetch this tractor again. I want to just have an extended object in my array because I already fetched the data. I don't want them to just disappear. So I add this fancy reduce where I'm checking the tractors array, and if there is a tractor already, I want to extend, and if it's not a tractor, I want to add. So it becomes very flaky, but still works. Now we are fine. Now we're fetching the data, extending the tractor array, right? No. Now, if you go to the tractor page by the deep link and then to the list, we'll have this. You wonder why we have this very lonely John Deere tractor. You remember this check with the tractor length more than 0. Well, now it's more than 0. You went to the tractor page, you have an array of tractors with this single one, and one is more than 0. So we're fixing the hacker logic. Now it's accounting for one tractor and it works again. The problem is with any additional requirement that we put in our application, our logic becomes more and more and more cumbersome. It will grow and have edge cases, have problems with synchronization, deduplication, problem with storing data in the cache. And we deal with a bunch of problems here. How to fetch only when data is not fetched already. We just dealt with it with our getter, but it's very hacky check, as you just have noticed. How to keep my data up to date? In our solution right now, we assume that we have some data in the cache and they never change on the server. It never synchronized, we fetch and forget. But it is not the case. What if we have more tractors added to the server? So we will need to build up polling or WebSocket connection or server-side events or whatever. What if 2 components start fetching simultaneously? We've seen this. What if 5 components start fetching simultaneously? What if 5 components start fetching simultaneously with some parameters? How do we deal with a bunch of requests? The problem here is not all states are born equal. And we have very clear distinction in the global state between our local state, that the synchronous and source of changes are local, and server cache. That is basically a reflection of what we have on the server on the local machine. I believe that in our programming JavaScript world, there is an almost perfect solution for server cache part, and it's called Apollo client. Been working with Apollo client for years and years, and it's super cool. It does all the logic in deduplication, storing in the cache, dealing with keys, dealing with updates. The only problem is GraphQL. Yes, you can work with REST API with Apollo client. You can build your own resolvers, but trust me, the boilerplate will be comparable to your local state manager, or even worse. And you would need to ensure the type safety yourself, adding type names to your REST API responses. I wouldn't say it's worth it. If you have mixed APIs in your application, like GitLab does, for example, we have GraphQL and REST, it's still worth to convert some REST API responses to GraphQL with Apollo client. Otherwise, no. So what do we do if we have REST application? Well, I believe React has a perfect solution for some time, and it made quite a hype on the React community. It's called React Query. For Vue, we only recently got the same kind of a solution, and it's a wrapper around React Query. It's called Vue Query by Damian Osipuk. And I just want to demo right now how it works with all the problems we mentioned and how it's basically writing, how easy it is, in fact. So let's switch to the code and to our application. So here is absolutely empty tractors list. And let's start building requests with uQuery and see how it goes in the app. So quick explanation for those who don't know Vue. Again, similar to React here. We have some ref, which creates a reactive property. And right now we assume that tractors are just an empty array and loading and error are always false. Our application is not failing on the empty state. Instead of this, let's start adding data with a Vue query. So we will have some data, and I alias them as tractors as a return from useQuery. useQuery is a Vue composable here. It looks a lot like React hook and has a very similar meaning here in Vue query. And in our useQuery, we need to pass a key, which will be a name for our query, and key behind the key that was stored in the cache. So you can assume that whatever we fetch with tractors, useQuery get tractors, is stored under the tractors key in our cache. We will need it later. For now, you can just assume that just some string. And as a second part, we need to pass a function, promise-based one, that will return us our tractors. I already imported it, and if you wonder what the magic it is, it's just Axios call. We just get in tractors from the local server that is running on my machine. So let's see in our application, there shouldn't be any tractors right now. There should be an error. Yeah, that's correct. And let's see what we have in home as tractors. And I mean, everyone here is probably familiar with REST API responses, and you can see that this is basically a response body. We have status text, some kind of headers, but we only need data from here, which is basically the array of tractors. My first instinct here as Vue developer was to build a computed property, a getter, that would just extract whatever I need from the tractors. But with the React query, we don't really need this because we can go with, let me just hide this. Yeah, we don't need meeting controls. We will go with select property. In select, you can take the response body and only return what we need from it. And we only need data. Let's go refresh the page, and here are our tractors. So we just fetched a list from the API, and it was quite simple. Now, I mentioned that any local state with any state manager gets complicated for synchronous data because we need to handle loading and errors. Very similar to Apollo client, useQuery from uQuery or React query also exposes is error and is loading. We need to remove our fake data from here. And I already used them in my template showing loading spinner and error message. Let's just see how it works. So let me make my network super slow. Maybe not super, but at least fast 3G. And for a brief moment, you have seen the loading spinner. I don't need to care about it myself. It's already baked in. Always feels like I'm not doing any additional job. And what about an error? Let's make our query fail and refresh. Oh, it's 3G. Let's make it no throttling. Like very slowly loading my tractors. Let me refresh again so it's faster. Okay, it should have been errored. Yeah. And I'm filtering with GraphQL, that's why I don't see this. So sorry again. You can see that our request fails 3 times, and only on the 4th time we have an error thrown. Why is this? Because in Vue and React query, there are very sensible defaults. And by default, it tries the request for 3 times before failing. What if your server went flaky? What if something happened? That's why they try to give you a chance to retry and fetch the data. I don't need this. I'm fine with one retry, and I can very simply modify this in my API call. Now, again, one try, fail. Super cool. There is also something interesting here. Let me just fix the API back. And let me change the focus of my tab in the browser. 2-time fetch. 3 times fetch. So every single time I refocus my window, there is another fetch. It makes sense for the applications that you have in the tab for some time. And maybe when you come back to them, we want to refetch the data to just show the user the freshest version of your server data. However, in my tractors application, I'm not changing anything on the server. I know this for sure. And I don't want to fetch every single time when I change the focus. So I'm just disabling this. And this is something that we already have that works in our app. So now let's try to add the same logic to the navbar and see how it works with data deduplication. And I'm in Vue, so I'm going to abstract this logic to the composable, which is just a function. So we will be exporting function use tractors. And we just copy paste all the cool logic from the home view, put it in our composable, move the imports up, fix API. API is now on the same level. And I need to return all the data from here to use them in my component. So I'm returning tractors, I'm returning is loading and is error. And now in my component, instead of all this part and view 2, I will say that const tractors is loading and is error. We are getting them from use tractors. Okay, my auto completion decided to fail me. I just need to import manually. I'm importing use tractors. Oh, now we see it. Cool. From this composables. Let's see if we broke anything. No, it still works. Now we can simply copy paste this part, go to our navbar, put it here, remove our tractors ref. We don't even need is loading and is error. We don't have them here. You can see that navbar has changed, so fetching data happens. But if I refresh the page, it will fail miserably and not even fail gracefully. There is just nothing on the page. What is happening here? It says that we cannot treat properties of undefined reading length in our tractor navbar because we are checking for tractors length. But when we fetch in data, tractors is undefined. It only becomes defined after the query is finished. In Apollo client, you would probably create one more reactive property as a default value. With React and Vue query, we have a nice utility to just tell when there is no data, use some placeholder data. Important moment here, if I just put an empty array, it will still fail because we have this extraction function, which means that our placeholder data also goes through it. And right now it tries to get data from an empty array and obviously fails. So it should be an object that has a data array and it's empty one by default. Now, whenever I refresh the page, everything is cool and my query is deduplicated. However, right now we just built a complex, expensive, partly re-implementation of Axios, because if I go to the tractor page, it fetches nothing. And when I go back, I have my tractors fetched. So what was the point? Like, why, where is the cache? Where is my data? What is the benefit of using Vue or React query? Again, by default, Vue query library assumes that your data is stale. So whenever you remount the component, it refetches data. And here goes probably the most important piece of knowledge about Vue and React query, that you can change this stale time. And if I say that I want stale time to be 5 seconds for this query, so now we fetch the tractors, we go here and back, and for 5 seconds, our cache is preserved. After 5 seconds, it's expired. Of course, in real life application, it's never 5 seconds. It goes for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however many minutes, but you got the point. You change the stale time, and you have your data preserved in the cache. Now let's quickly extend the same logic for a single tractor just to see how do we utilize any parameters passed to the query. It's just a bit more complicated, but still doable. So here we say that const data tractor and is loading. Again, we use query. And we will be utilizing getTractor, but it's a bit different. Here, the first property will be an array where we define the key tractors, let's say the same key, but with a parameter. It will be props ID. Props ID we are getting from the router, and it's the slug of the page. And second part is also a bit more complicated because this is now a callback function where we call in getTractor, because we need to pass an ID. And of course, we still need this select, because this is still a REST API response. So we still have the same REST data. And of course, we're removing this placeholder. Why Zoom is still showing up? High floating controls, thank you. So refreshing the page, we have the tractors. Now we have the tractor. Cool, we go to the page and we see an interesting thing. We preserve the tractors for 5 seconds, but we didn't do the same for the tractor. Do I need to pass this stale time for every query? Not really. I can do this on the application level, and I can say 10 seconds. So this is a global setting for all the queries, and I can override it with a stale time for single query. So right now, if I fetch the tractor, you can see that it's preserved for some time. And it works perfectly, because if I go for the second tractor, I have my fetch done. For 5 seconds, I have a cache. I can do it for 5 minutes, and I didn't do as much as I would do with Pinia to have this working. So there is the only last piece that we have, and it's modifying data. Because what if I need to add one more tractor? How do I do this with Vue query, and how does it reflect on my interface? So let's come back to our home view and create some kind of new tractor, which will be just an object with ID, 11, and I need a number, not a string here. 11 name, Fwdays tractor. And empty image URL because I'm too lazy to find a placeholder. Now I want to add this, and very similar to Apollo client, I think it was some kind of inspiration in Apollo client. We need to send a post request, and any changes that you make to the server in React query are done with use mutation. Again, Apollo uses mutation, so we are using mutation here too. It exposes the method called mutate that we will be using in our interface. And we are just calling use mutation. And here we only need to pass a callback. I will go with add tractor, and add tractor is a post request that actually posted to our API. And I need to pass my new tractor here. And I will need some kind of a button called add tractor. And on click here, I'm calling mutate. Cool. Now let's go here to our page, clear my API calls, click attractor, and you can see that there was a post request, successful one, that returned us attractor, but there is no change in our API. Obviously, because we didn't modify the cache in any way. Again, it's similar to Apollo client. Whenever you update any kind of the property, it's done automatically for you. Whenever you add something, some entity to the list, you need to do some manual work. So we are going to do this. Whenever we refresh the page, you can see there is an empty Fwdays tractor and very distorted button. So I will change an ID here, because if I don't, my server will just throw me internal server error, and I will blame backend for all the problems. And let's build some logic to the mutation. So we will need to set some data for the query. So we access the data in the client instance. And for this, we need to access the query client. We have a specific composable for this called useQueryClient. And on mutation, I want to do something when mutation is successful. So we have onSuccess callback here. That returns us a response. And on our onSuccess, I want to say that query client set query data. And this is the moment we need the key for our query, so tractors. So for the query tractors, we want to say set data. Sorry. And what would be the data here? So we would need to set our existing array, so tractors value. This is the only tricky moment for those of you who don't know Vue, because ref creates an object with a single property value that is reactive because we're using proxies. So tractors value, and we need res data that we put here. Okay, let's go and see if we fail. So refresh the page, add tractor, and now we have two Fwdays tractors, which is amazing. So this was basically it to demo you the basic functionality of React and Vue query. Of course, it's way more advanced. It works with polling built in. You just need to specify the polling time. It works with indefinite queries. It's perfect with any custom logic you want to apply to the query. But for the basic case, this was more than sufficient. And thank you all for listening. That was it.
Thank you for your thank you for your presentation. During even before your talk, I had a few questions regarding what about errors, what about the duplications, and you answered them all through your slides. So thank you for all these details. However, we have a couple of questions from our audience. The first question is from Valeria. She's asking, hi, could you explain please again why Apollo client and GraphQL using is better than REST API? Because we get only necessary data and therefore is more productive. So yeah.
Okay, we can also speak Ukrainian, so I will just switch and probably it will be better for you and for people there. So, okay, давайте українською. Я зараз перемкнуся. Доповідь на тему, чому краще юзати GraphQL і Apollo Client, це можна окремо влаштовувати холівар на 2 години. Чесно, я можу. В мене є окрема доповідь про це теж. Трошки самопіару. Насправді, вас ніхто не може примусити або сказати вам, що GraphQL краще для вашого конкретного додатку. Чому? Є, наприклад, GitLab, в якого дуже великий нестінг всього, і в якому треба фетчити просто шалену кількість даних для того, щоб відобразити їх в нашому UI. В такому випадку нам зручніше працювати з GraphQL, те саме від хабу. Якщо ви пробували фетчити, наприклад, список репозиторіїв, і ви хочете, наприклад, мову репозиторія, вам доведеться зробити 2 запити. Тому що перший в списку репозиторіїв ви будете бачити тільки лінк, і за цим лінком ви можете взяти мову. Тому кількість запитів буде дорівнювати кількості репозиторіїв плюс по одному запиту на кожен репозиторій. В такому випадку GraphQL працює краще, тому що вам дасть один запит, тільки те, що вам потрібно. Знову ж таки, з точки зору бекенду, картина зовсім не така райдужна. Якщо ви поговорите з бекенд-інженерами, 90% вам скажуть, що працювати з GraphQL складніше. Це правда, працювати з GraphQL на бекенді набагато складніше. З точки зору фронтенду, я б обрала GraphQL, напевно, в 95%, але це персональна точка зору. Тому дивіться за тим, що вам потрібно, з чим у вас працює бекенд і так далі, і так далі.
Дякую за відповідь. Мені здається, сьогодні остання доповідь буде теж про чому треба, про Apollo клієнта GraphQL і REST API. Я думаю, це дуже гаряча тема, що вибрати. Дякую. Ще одне питання про Валерія, від Валерії. Що у вас на слайдах була конструкція script setup? Це щось специфічне для Vue.js?
Script setup – це специфічне для Vue.js. В нас, починаючи з версії 3, є два варіанти API. Це класичний Options API, з яким ви працювали в Vue, якщо ви його бачили, це типовий об'єкт, який у вас є, в якому є data, methods і тому подібне, просто як моментально перемикається на Pidgin English. І є Composition API, який візуально дуже схожий на React Hooks, але дуже відрізняється по імплементації. Фактично, це метод написання, в якому ми декларуємо всю реактивну логіку і всі функції безпосередньо у скрипті. В варіанті з Options API це була б окремий філд в об'єкті, який називається Setup. Script Setup – це всього лише цукор синтаксичний поверх цього. Чим це краще? Це краще і гірше. Чим це краще, нам не потрібно буде експліцитно повертати дані за скрипт сетапу, як це було б необхідно у звичайному варіанті скрипту. Чим це погано? Тим самим, тому що ми не бачимо моментально, що повертається. Все, що ми пишемо у скрипт сетап, доступне нам в темплейті. Це не завжди потрібно, тому це мінуси. Я його використовувала тут, тому що це просто швидше писати код, швидше, простіше для демо. Я не забуду повернути, наприклад, мої трактори зі скрипту, але так само у Vue можете працювати з звичайним скриптом.
Дякую за відповідь. Ще є декілька питань від мене. Перше питання. На слайдах в коді остання частина була про додавання add mutation, про додавання трактора. А в мене питання, чи легко реалізувати так званий optimistic update, коли, наприклад, ми додаємо трактор, а у нас реквест завершується з ошибкою, фейлиться, і от що робити? Чи просто це зробити?
Дякую, дуже класне питання. Так, це робиться так само з однією, ми надаємо практично одну опцію до опції Use Mutation, і в нас буде оптимістичний апдейт. Так що так, дуже просто насправді.
Супер. А тим часом у нас ще одне питання з чату. Євгеній питає, чи є красиве вирішення callback hello у графі? Я думаю, що це про GraphQL.
Ні, немає хорошого вирішення callback hello у графі, на жаль. Я його точно не знаю.
Добре, можна буде ще подискувати потім у Discord voice-чаті. І ще одне питання, знов від мене, якщо можна. Часто буває, якщо ми говоримо про REST API, часто буває таке, що так, нам треба зробити декілька викликів. Наприклад, я не знаю, нам треба спочатку зробити запит про трактори, а потім зробити запит про якусь мета-інформацію. Чи або про юзера, а потім якісь експерименти для юзера. Чи є якийсь простий спосіб зробити це від React Query, якось інкапсулювати, можливо, в функцію useState, ну, щось, якщо можна?
В них є опція, яка робить вам subsequent queries, тобто, якщо у вас один запит залежить від іншого, він виконає перше, дочекається респонсу, якщо респонс вдався, буде робити наступний. Знову ж таки, це робиться буквально однією опцією query.
Супер, все дуже просто. Дуже дякую. Мені здається, що це всі запитання. Ми можемо перемкнутися до Discord Voice Chat, і вже слухачі зможуть напряму наживо задати питання. Дуже дякую за презентацію.
Дякую за те, що запросили.